Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day of our symposium, A Coincidence of Wants, the Shape of Value, in conjunction with Kapwani Kiwanga, Trinket. I'm Emily Haydet, and I thank you all for joining us this morning. I also want to thank Kapwani Kiwanga, Gaitan Verna for hosting us, the National Gallery of Canada, and the Wexner Center for the Arts, and all of our colleagues who have made this symposium happen. So today's session is going to focus on material and social structures. We're grateful to have Pierre Niccolò Sofia and Mabel O. Wilson, who will investigate how the trade of glass beads for goods, such as wood, gold, palm oil, and metals, may have significantly shaped the world we inhabit. These historical trade relations have laid the foundations of modern infrastructure, profoundly influencing the development of our societies and economies. This session will consider how global systems have been irreversibly altered by these exchanges. By tracing the historic pathways and consequences of these trades, the session underscores the intertwined nature of material and social structures, revealing how seemingly small objects have played pivotal roles in the development of the foundations which our societies sit. So we'll begin this morning with some presentations of research from our speakers, Mabel O. Wilson and Pierre Niccolò Sofia, before having a dialogue and opening it up to questions and conversation. I'll quickly introduce our speakers, but please do refer to the digital program located via the QR code on the screen for their full biographies. Pierre Niccolò Sofia is a historian at University of Padua, where he's currently carrying out a comparative analysis of economic resilience of Venetian glass and silk industries and trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. Mabel O. Wilson is an undisciplined scholar and designer and is currently a professor in architecture, planning, and preservation, and African American and African diasporic studies at Columbia University. We'll begin with Pierre.
Thank you very much, Emily, for your introduction, and sorry for my voice. I hope you understand what I'm gonna say. Before starting, let me express a warm thank and all my gratitude to all organizers, moderators, and speakers of this symposium, to the National Gallery of Canada, to the Wexner Center for the Arts, and to the Ocean Space here in Venice. A special thanks to Kapwani Kiwanga for giving us the opportunity to share this experience and exchange ideas in this amazing context. During these 2-3 days, we all saw a lot of glass beads and especially conterie. We thought and talked about them as more than small objects on a global scale of analysis. So we took these objects as a prism through which reflects on past and present societies. Different perspectives helped us to focus on different themes: value, trade, roots, mobility, economic, material culture, culture as a whole, exploitation, revolution, resistance, independence, art, etc. I would like to share with you my own perspective on values and meanings of glass beads in the past, using my research experience as the foundation for this conversation. So it is a specific point of view, mostly based on primary sources from European archives and scientific literature, that I think can be helpful to better understand the role of beads in human societies in the early modern period. I will explore 3 concepts of values and meanings of beads in the 18th century Venetian context, because through these issues we can better understand impacts of material culture, of material artifacts on economic and social structures, both at local and global level. So the first concept is a basic raw meaning of beads as economic assets in Venice's industrial system and trade. The second one is the idea of beads as tools in a broader mercantilist policy. The third one is the view of beads as the output of a specific manufacturing organization with its power relationships and internal dynamics. So let's focus on 18th century Venice. I chose this map to help us understand what the most serene republic in the age of Enlightenment was. A small power in Europe, with no military leverage in front of European superpowers like France or Austria, limited human and fiscal resources, but still with some Mediterranean possession. You can see Dalmatia, Ionian Islands, Albania and Peloponnese until 1718, and a resurgent merchant fleet. In that time, the city of Venice had roughly 140,000 inhabitants, which was 25% of London or Paris. And despite a relative economic decline, it remained a big Mediterranean port and an important industrial center. Roughly, Venetian guilds enrolled more than 30,000 people, while much more numerous were women, men, and children employed in workshops and manufacturers around the city. In the 18th century, glass became the first industrial sector for exports of the city. Its growth was fueled by the expansion of glass bead production and trade that started at the midst of the 17th century as a collateral development of the Atlantic trade growth. As more experienced scholars already explained yesterday, this growth relied on the expansion of the plantation economy in the Americas and on the related Atlantic slave trade. So glass beads became the Venetian original contribution to this system. As a meritorious and wide literature has shown in the last decades, beads were not worthless objects exchanged for precious human lives by clever Europeans and Americans who deceived unaware and naive Africans. This racist interpretation has given way to a more appropriate and historically accurate reading that interprets beads as components of a larger group of objects that responded to a sophisticated demand expressed by different societies in the world and especially by their elites. So beads had and still have tremendous values in especially non-European, non-Western societies. The point I would like to stress here is that beads were a crucial object also for the Venetians, or at least for a part of them in the early modern period. Let's take a look at these images. They are two photos I have taken in Venetian State Archives of 2 pages of Venice's custom books. In short, these documents provide a representation of flows registered in Venetian customs in the 18th century. Here, you see the 2 pages dedicated to conterie and to manifatture a lume, which were lamp work beads, the 2 great groups in which glass beads were registered in Venetian customs. As you can see, there is a list of destinations with the associated quantity of exported beads. So we can find cities of Venetian mainland like Verona, Padova, and ports of Venetian Maritime Empire, but also Constantinople, Alexandria in Egypt, Tripoli in present-day Libya, or the generic category of ponente, which meant the West, a big, enormous region that went from Gibraltar to Hamburg to St. Petersburg. Thanks to these sources and other coming from Venetian guilds and government, we can measure the size of the bead phenomenon in the 18th century Venice. At the time, every year, at least 650 metric tons of glass beads left the city of St. Mark. Roughly 40% of them reached the Ottoman Empire, and another 40% reached European ports involved in the Atlantic slave trade. So, say, Cadiz, Lisbon, Liverpool, Bristol, London, Amsterdam, etc. However, industrial output could be considerably higher. As some sources attest that in the 1790s, more than 1,000 tons of conterie were produced in Venice. Indeed, the production of beads provided work for more than 1,000 people, internal or external, to 3 important guilds of the city: the Guild of Murano, the Guild of Margariteri, and the Guild of Perleri, living and working in Murano and Venice. Due to characteristics of the sources, it is difficult to determine a precise estimation of the monetary value of this flow. A cautious estimation of 500,000 ducats sounds realistic, which means that the value of bead export was roughly equivalent to the yearly revenues of 50 Venetian patrician families, or to 10 tons of silver. In the last decades of the 18th century, official custom registers show that in terms of monetary value, glass bead represented 10% of the export of the city. In real terms, however, this figure may have been higher. And it is important to remember that in that time, Venice still had a very diversified export-oriented industrial system. High-quality silk, proto-chemical industries, metallurgical industries, etc. As a matter of fact, beads were a valuable asset for Venetian economy. Beads were strategic not just in material terms, but also in more conceptual terms, linked to Venetian government's economic policy. That's why I chose one of Canaletto's paintings representing the Canal Grande from the Molo, in which you can see a British vessel with the Union Jack. Despite the circulation of liberal and physiocratic ideas, Venetian oligarchy remained essentially orientated to a mercantilist view of the exchange. The world was a finite whole in which every country had to fight to obtain a piece of it, avoiding the loss of precious metals. This meant that Venetian economic orientation included ideas such as those of trade surplus, industrial exportation, support, and merchant fleet development. In this context, beads were conceived as strategic goods to conquer new markets, obtain rich goods for internal consumption, and decrease the loss of bullion. This idea assumed a crucial importance in connection with the Atlantic trade because from the 17th century, Venice began to import hundreds and then thousands of tons of sugar, cocoa, coffee, and indigo, which were, for sure, the output of the plantation economy from France, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain. In the Venetian government perspective, beads were the most important product that the Venetian could exchange directly for these new essential consumption goods without losing coins. In practice, every year, Venetian merchants and producers exchanged hundreds of tons of glass beads for Atlantic sugar, cocoa, indigo, but also dried and salted cod from the Atlantic. I could also talk about the Levant trade, about those considerable flows of beads that reached the Ottoman Empire and from there Persia, India, Arabia, Eastern Africa, and further, but I do not have time. What I want to stress here is that beads acted also as a fundamental gear in a broader mercantilist system, and that as desired product for international trade, they were able to maintain Venice interconnected with major economic flows of the 18th century. Finally, beads were also the result of a specific industrial environment. As I previously said, Venetian glass beads industry employed more than 1,000 workers inside and outside the institutional framework of guilds called arts in Venice. This means that beads provided for the everyday survival of a lot of women, children, and men, as well as they represented an opportunity for several merchant entrepreneurs to make profits. Beads were the output of a complex work organization that integrated workforce exploitation, flexibility towards regulations, product innovation, and centuries-old know-how related to glass. Women workers became one of the keystones of the success of this sector. As scholars like Annabella Vitis and Francesca Trivellato have shown, legally and illegally employed as impieraresse. We talked a lot about these figures in the previous days. They were also employed at the road or glass cane sorters and cutters, or as proper artisans working on benches with torches, creating lampwork beads. Women, as well as immigrants and children, provided a large reserve of workforce that was cheaper than male craftsmen. In the slide next to the Impieraressa of Giovanni Grevenbroich, you can see a document which symbolizes at least a part of this experience, of the experience of women workers in the Venetian bead war. In 1766, Paolina Lanari was found illegally working beads on a bench. She was an external to the Guild of Perleri, so she could not be legally employed. The interesting details, and we have a lot of this type of documentation in Venetian archives. The interesting detail is that Paolina was repeatedly caught in her activities, and that despite menaces from the highest Venetian magistracies, one for all the Consiglio dei Dieci or the Inquisitori di Stato, she continued to work, probably because she needed to work. The employment of external workforce contributed greatly to squeeze production costs that maintain Venetian sector competitive on international market, and also these the employment of this external workforce transformed the relationship between master craftsmen, also male craftsmen, and merchant entrepreneurs. Over time, the formers suffered a change in their status inside the guilds, moving from a relatively protected position to an almost complete submission to employers. This process was facilitated and encouraged by changing guild legislation that was approved by the Venetian government. However, exploitation is not the only perspective through which analyze and understand the bead experience in Venice. As Barbara Bettoni recently showed, the success of Venetian beads was also built on a continuous process of product innovation that revolved around technical skills, imagination, imitation capacities. We talked about Bohemia or the present-day Czech Republic, of dozens of workers. Thanks to ancient know-hows, creativity, knowledge sharing and transmission, which also included women as agents of technical dissemination in workshops and houses, Venetian bead sector was able to adapt its catalogs to the changing global demand. Yesterday we saw an image of a bead book. Here in the slide you can see an 18th century, end of the 18th century, detailed catalog of products of Perleri for 1800, consisting of a list of hundreds of types of beads that filled 57 pages. A better knowledge of regional markets demand allowed to build lists of specific types of beads intended for specific markets. Constantinople, London, Lisbon, but also Wallachia, for example, or Aleppo, Spain, etc. In conclusion, 18th century Venetian glass bead experience hides several material and social meanings and dynamics, as they were at the same time the symbol of the city's industriousness and connection with global trade, especially the Atlantic slave trade and the Atlantic plantation economy, but also a reservoir of economic value and strategic mercantilist tool, and finally a mean to gain material livelihood and an object that implied work exploitation, but also creativity and technical expertise. Thank you for your attention.